What is the promise of AI in government? What is the promise of AI in these complex systems where you're really trying to, not just government, but actually with the public and private sector, with civil society, really build up an economy, society that really is markedly advanced? So what is it about this ability to understand and manage complexity at scale?
Welcome to AI, Government and the Future, a podcast by Corner Alliance. We explore the intersection of artificial intelligence, government, and the future. We work with government to create results. We ignite your agency's mission by helping you to design and implement high-impact and innovative federal programs in AI, broadband, cybersecurity, public safety, and more. Being a government ally is at the core of all we do.
Welcome back to AI, Government in the Future. I'm your host, Marc Leh. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Peter Swartz, co-founder of Altana, an AI technology firm providing visibility and insights into global supply chains used by governments and commercial industry. Peter is a prominent figure in the field of artificial intelligence and global trade with deep expertise in data processing and AI ML systems. As the co-founder and chief science officer at Altana, Peter has been instrumental in developing AI solutions that aim to make global trade safer and more efficient. With over a decade of experience in leveraging AI to enhance supply chain efficiency, Peter's work has been recognized at major industry events, including the World Trade Organization and the World Economic Forum. Today, we will dive into the transformative role of AI in global trade, exploring how AI technologies are improving safety and security, driving innovation in transportation and logistics, and addressing disruptions in the global trade landscape. Peter will share his insights on the current landscape, future trends, and crucial role of government and public-private partnerships in this domain. Welcome to the podcast, Peter. It's great to have you.
Mark, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I wanted to open up to learn a little bit more about your background and how you got started at Altana. So you've had a significant impact on the field of AI and global trade through your work at Altana and beyond. Can you start by sharing a little bit more about your journey in this field and what initially drew you to focus on the intersection of AI and international commerce?
I'd be happy to. So just to talk a little bit about Altana, and you introduced it really well. What we are here fundamentally is a company that applies artificial intelligence on top of the world's largest organized body of supply chain data to deal with some of the most pressing issues of our time, whether that's great power competition across the world's supply chains, the climate crisis, disruptions from breakdown of globalization. We're trying to fix globalization. We recently took on Series C funding led by Thomas Tull's U.S. Innovative Technology Fund, as well as other participants included March Capital Generation, Salesforce Ventures, Friends and Family, and key existing investors such as Google Ventures, Activate Capital, Floating Point, and OMERS, bringing our valuation to $1 billion. So very grateful for that. And work has been the culmination of interests I've had since I was a kid, actually. So I grew up in DC, and I was always interested in technical and engineering matters, but also interested in international stuff, I would say. I don't know as a child that I frankly could have verbalized it more deeply than that. But really, the meat of my interest has always been complex systems and global scale systems. And I was really lucky to find, call it value chain management, call it global supply chains, call it the global physical economy. I think all of these terms almost undersell what it really is. It's about how do we manage our production and our supply and our demand on the planet such that we really can build up that better, more efficient, more sustainable, more resilient, and fairer world that to me is very effective. And so if I think about what drives me, it's really making a substantial impact and working on really tough technical questions. And that's been the meat of my background. I did that in my education, where I did both undergraduate and master's, both in engineering, but in political science, international trade focus, and also a quantitative focus. But then also in my work, I was head of data science at a company, Panjiva, which was effectively a Bloomberg for global supply chains, global trade. We sold that to S&P Global at the start of 2018, and then we started Altana with this vision of building up a better globalization.
And for the listeners, do you mind describing maybe some of the key product verticals that Altana is working on right now? I know you have a mapping software, some compliance sourcing tools. Are there some key pillars of the Altana platform that you'd like to speak to briefly?
So the framework that we're working on is we are a value chain management system to manage everything from the extraction of the raw materials to the distribution of the final goods. And if you think about what that implies, it implies three actions, which is see, focus, and act. And the last one, I would say, is really crucial. Insight and intelligence is not enough. We're building up a system to actually manage it. What you're seeing right now is that government regulation, climate change, geopolitics, and other disruptions from COVID-19 to the Red Sea, they're all driving a new imperative for businesses and governments to know, understand, and manage those multi-tier supply chains and value chains, and not just have these just very local optimizations, very local understandings. And so what we're doing here is building out a novel system to know, connect, and manage this information. And whether that's you're looking at carbon emissions or helping to fight illicit fentanyl production, deal with forced labor, or issuing a new, I would say, expanded version of insurance, it's fundamentally about building this source of truth and then applying reliable AI, not sort of, and I don't mean just like a faddish thing, but like an AI based on a source of truth that can drive you to action here and then having a system to manage that action.
Yeah, I think it's great that you provided some examples of specific problems to solve that may be top of mind or high priority for a customer or a use case related to semiconductor production, pharmaceutical, policy compliance. So I think on previous episodes, we've talked a lot about as government agencies, private sector organizations seek to integrate AI capabilities into their product and service portfolio or create new products and services, starting with problems to solve and intended outputs and being able to iterate on that is key. So I think it's great to hear that you have that level of detail and are working on some specific problems. That's great. You've been on the forefront of integrating AI capabilities into global value chain management. How are you using, or how is AI currently being used to improve or increase visibility into global trade? And what do you see as its most significant impact so far?
So we talked about the value chain a second ago. That type of visibility has just not been feasible before. And so taking a step back, even more broadly, like what is the promise of AI in government? What is the promise of AI in these complex systems where you're really trying to not just government, but like actually with the public and private sector, with civil society, really build up an economy, society that really is markedly advanced. So what is it about this ability to understand and manage complexity at scale? And in the context of what we do then, this means unifying billions of records, whether they be transportation documents, whether they be corporate registry information, whether they be risk or opportunity, whether they be real-time events, whether they be a variety of different types of underlying pieces of information. Take these billions of records in many different languages, say English, Spanish, Portuguese, Chinese, Russian, Ukrainian, Vietnamese, I could go on, right? And leverage AI first to just actually unify and create a structured representation of what's happening. You could call a knowledge graph or a map. Then on top of that, you're still going to have billions of records and hundreds of millions of companies, especially if you start including shell companies or just corporate structures. Generating insight upon it, that's that focus action. So you see what's happening, you do it in a sort of a way that unifies your view of it, but then builds out that multi-tier understanding. Then focus might be, okay, like where do I see like the most carbon emissions? What should I facilitate at the border? How should I issue this insurance? Or to whom should I target? Or where are the bottlenecks? Or the flip side of that might be like, where in an illicit network should I target, right? And then the next step would be action. So AI can definitely help with that focus component where it's, you're going to go through and you've got all those records. How do you like pick the signal from the noise there? Great application of AI. We use it all the time. And then finally, when you think about like action, this is something that involves both humans and machines. Some things you're going to fully automate. You're like, I'm going to move goods across a border at high volume. They're already moving there. How do I boost economic growth and boost compliance at the same time? You can leverage the other information there. You may also have a lot of decision support, collaboration enabled by AI. How do you communicate across multiple languages? I could go on, but I think you see the promise of it there as well.
Yeah. And I think at least some of the use cases that we've explored on this podcast, I think the focus and being able to, there's a lot of manual labor or just programming required to aggregate and structure information from which you can gain insights. And then maybe developing some AI ML tools to bring some unknown information to light that could edify decision-making. I guess, have you seen AI tools really play an active role in making the decisions for organizations that may be using a tool like Altana, or how do you see AI assisting with that decision-making or action process beyond how these tools may be used today?
Oh, no, absolutely. And I would say that the best way that AI assists in this is when based on an underlying source of truth. So you might be trying to pick up like some sort of signal. You're like, oh, how should I understand resiliency, or how should I understand reshoring and nearshoring? And then like, where are the vulnerabilities? That might be a network analysis challenge, right? Like how does this respond under different scenarios? You've got this large map that you've constructed. You have to have it to do that analysis. And then on top of that, you wish to generate insight and highlight the bottlenecks, highlight the different scenarios. Or you might be targeting like an illicit network. That's not a signal that's going to be necessarily obvious, right? So you've got that, and AI is extremely good at doing that. And then with humans, they can go and further act upon it. In the case of even fuller automation, again, to go back to this point about like moving cargo quickly, you might just need to be moving cargo really quickly across like you're doing it anyways, right? So there's going to be an automatic component one way or another, or some bits that you just expedite. Great application.
I have read that you and Altana have recently joined a U.S. Department of Commerce initiative to support trustworthy AI development, and public-private partnerships are becoming increasingly important or widespread in advancing, I guess, government or public sector awareness of the opportunities, the risks, the issues in relation to integrating AI or machine learning capabilities into traditionally human-driven processes at the government level. Do you mind elaborating on that collaboration and describing how collaborations like this being important in advancing application of AI in global trade and other government applications and use cases?
We believe such collaborations are critical to build out a better globalization. And then beyond that, of course, just to build out applications of AI that benefit all of us. And so just to speak to our view of how you build out a better globalization, fundamentally enabling the public-private collaboration there and moving from a cat and mouse game or sort of a fragmented game to actually collaborating between the public and private sector to understand the multiple tiers and then build out these resilient, efficient, sustainable, fair supply chains we've been talking about. That is such a key thing to do. And then to talk about AI's application itself, it's really the same. It has to be a collaborative interaction. We're proud to participate in the NIST initiative. We think it's really important. And we're proud to participate in similar initiatives. And really like the type of benefit is working together to achieve those types of outcomes I just spoke to.
Yeah. Are there typical roles that you find well suited for government agencies versus private sector organizations play? I know in previous work that I've done with NIST and Department of Energy, HHS organizations, I know a lot of federal programs are interested in curating and providing high quality data sets that could be leveraged or served as a reference point for AI tool developers to use to ensure that there's a certain amount of trustworthiness or accuracy in the types of prediction or classification that these tools are producing. I guess from your experience or early interactions with some of the other stakeholders represented in the NIST AI safety initiative, are there things that are working really well or roles that you would like to see people playing based on early involvement?
I think some of the ones you highlighted are great. Standards, tests, harmonization, helping everyone get to common understanding of what we're talking about. What does safety mean? What are the different types of safety? How do we score these things? And then working together on how you actually judge those standards. I think that's great. And then we'll get to this later. I think there's a lot of cool opportunities as well for government to really benefit from AI and the standards that are created there as well around like the applications, even other rules, in as much as they allow AI in their usage when it's based around a source of truth, based around evidentiary information, can really drive forward some of the same initiatives the governments care about by that incorporation of public and private sector cooperation.
Taking a look at how AI machine learning tools may improve policy development and or enforcement processes for government institutions and vice versa. Public policy may influence the adoption, development, and rollout of AI tools. Are there specific opportunities or challenges that you've experienced when collaborating between private AI developers or innovators and public sector organizations that may be regulating these tools or providing guidance, overseeing the development of next generation kind of computing technologies, or anything that you'd like to speak on there?
Yeah, I'd say we've always had a very, very positive experience on the government side. And we built our systems from the start to be federated, privacy preserving, data sovereignty preserving systems that we could deploy out and would be able to share intelligence without sharing underlying data. And this is, frankly, federated systems, federated learning, and cooperation on shared visions of improving a field, like in our case, field globalization. That is a great area for the public and private sector to meet. And we've been proud to support a variety of nations in their work in this field, whether that's US CBP around forced labor and fentanyl, the UK on the Global Supply Chain Watchtower, and other nations on similar sort of collaborative visions. It's been a real pleasure to work with our colleagues. And I would just say that for us, we from the start had this collaborative vision. We knew that this couldn't be done by one company or one sector of society alone. And so we've built out our systems for that purpose.
Oh, that's great. And in terms of balancing, I know there's, especially in the EU with the EU AI Act, top of mind for governments is the need to balance regulation with the need to drive innovation and advancement in the sophistication, scale, and usefulness of AI technologies. Are there any recommendations, Peter, from your perspective that would aid governments in developing policies or guidance that is helpful, not overly restrictive when it comes to creative ways of integrating AI tools into either government missions directly or market sectors like a global trade use case that are heavily regulated to begin with?
Look, I'll say it varies from use case to use case. I think that for us, one of the things I would emphasize is that, and that we would emphasize, is AI can be a great source of positive change in a complicated world because of this ability to handle complexity at scale. So I think the important thing to keep in mind is, how is the task currently being done right now? And does AI improve or harm it? Just to speak directly to my own interests, what we work on, I'm talking about like specifically the physical world. I'm talking about existing large-scale global systems that are enormously complicated. And we believe AI has an enormously positive role to play in helping to better manage those complex systems. And the same thing for me, I would say, around medicine, around math and science, around economic growth, all of these things. And I would just emphasize, frankly, for everyone involved here, that those positives should just really be kept in mind, in addition to very real risks. And so that, for us, is how we think about those problems.
We've seen some federal organizations initiate pilot programs looking to adopt AI-supported tools for kind of evergreen government functions, a public-facing chatbot, basic activities that can increase the quality, speed, and efficiency of government services. And one question that comes up related to this point is, how do we quantify the return on investment or the improved performance of a service or a product with and without the use of AI, and using that potential, benefit or, net gain in efficiency or quality, accuracy when going into a cost-benefit decision on policy risks or balancing whether or not an AI-supported use case is worth it, given some of the cultural or cybersecurity hesitations that a federal sponsor may have when considering adopting a tool like this. Are there effective ways to measure the effectiveness of AI performance gains realized with some of the use cases that you've been involved with?
Oh, absolutely. We've seen, I spoke to some of the important use cases we do earlier, and then on the private sector too, we've seen some of our clients realize efficiencies that are worth, $100 million. You know what I mean? We've seen the ability to maintain critical medical or other supply chains in turbulent times. So we've seen gigantic benefits in the work that we do, real impact. And I would say that as we think about evaluating these systems, and the reason I gave that example, for example, around like monetary value is, frankly, judge the tree by its fruits. Are you producing the business outcome you're looking for? The same question you'd ask of the organization already, whether it's the public or private sector. And so I don't actually really think it's often that complicated. Obviously, you can get into testing and evaluation in advance. You want to roll these things out as pilot projects. You want to have train and test and validation sets, like all the best practice stuff. Don't hear me another way. Don't waste time deploying something that you are not sure is going to work. Try it on small pilots, test how it's working, work from first principles. It's not magic. If it's like the data is not available and no human can do it, maybe, but like you got to have a good reason for it, right? But if it's, a trained expert can do this, but we can't scale them, or there seems to be a subtle signal here, there could really be something there. And again, you judge it by, in the end, does it achieve that? And even your technical evaluations should be giving an estimate of that impact in addition to their sort of more machine learning AI metrics.
In addition to measuring the effectiveness or business impact, return on investment of AI versus non-AI supported product and service functions, I think another point of conversation, at least in the federal sector, when considering the adoption or integration of these AI tools is, are these tools trustworthy or accurate in what they're predicting? Or what is the error rate? What is the kind of potential downside of an AI tool supplying a false positive, false negative, and having a public or private sector executive acting on that information? Are there accuracy or reliability metrics that you've seen to be particularly effective in making the case for expanded use of AI in some of these use cases as well?
Absolutely. And to return to that, well, I'll say, first of all, for us, it's all about being based on a source of truth and having that evidentiary basis. And so what we don't believe works is black box systems that aren't based on a source of truth. What we do think works is AI applied both to generate that source of truth. And I don't mean by constructing the documents. Obviously, those are raw materials that are from the real world. Those are ground truth. But then unifying it without unique identifiers, understanding those multiple tiers, building up that part site specific understanding of the world, and then acting upon it, but always referencing the raw documents. So for critical decisions, you can always go back and check. You can always understand the justification. And increasingly, with large language models tied to retrieval augmented generation, you can actually have it go through and summarize that for you. Again, though, always tying back to the raw information and doing that citation. And just to go back to your point about metrics, honestly, these metrics are as evergreen for machines as they are for humans. Is it precise? Is it recalling the information you're looking for? Is it accurate? And then what's the impact in terms of monetary value? If it's continuous, how far is it off? Are you looking at boosting resiliency? Okay, how many disruptions are you facing? What's the decrease under this system? Are you looking at increasing growth? Okay, what's the forecast gaining growth? Like I could go on, but it's like, really, it's just the business outcome. And the baseline is, as you said, it's like the existing state of play. It's the alternatives you have there. And you judge it by the same metrics you judge the AI system.
Yeah, I think it's well said. And I think I know Altana provides a visual map of very complex interconnected networks, but the same goes generally for explaining the behavior of a model, like having a visual logic model that says, hey, we're using a bunch of records that the organization has access to today, and we're going to be analyzing it and using these kind of techniques to reconcile them and gain insight. I think that upfront kind of requirements gathering and level setting conversation with a project sponsor before you begin developing an AI tool goes a long way, at least in federal organizations that I've seen. Just having clear buy-in and being able to explain in a transparent fashion how the model operates and what data is going to be used and our hypothesis or the intended outcomes that the model is going to produce is a lot to put people at ease when sometimes the risk-averse nature of a lot of mission-critical federal programs can be hesitant to adopt new AI-driven tools. So I think that's good to keep in mind.
Totally. And if I may, it's not just about, when we talk about explainability, I feel like sometimes machine learning people or AI people fixate on explaining the underlying mechanisms of the model. And I think that's interesting and important. But what's additionally important is actually constructing the evidentiary base and surfacing it to the user. And a government user or a private sector user, is often less interested in specifically how a specific feature impacted the decision and more interested in what's the underlying information that is justifying this decision, what's the underlying documents, because that's what they're going to need to justify in the end. And that's what explainable AI is. I think like explainable AI sometimes gets fixated on model mechanisms. And what we're really talking about here is surfacing the underlying relevant information that justifies the decision. And those two things are related, but they're not always the same.
No, I agree with you there. And that latter description, the evidence and the rationale for coming to a decision that has been edified through AI processing, I think that's a little bit more accessible to a larger population of people than the inner workings of the model itself. So I would agree with you wholeheartedly there. I guess before we move on to maybe some recommendations more broadly, are there any specific projects or initiatives, either through your recent collaboration with Department of Commerce or other federal programs, either here in the US or government programs around the world that you're particularly proud of or have used some of these AI processing engines in a really innovative way that might benefit some of our listeners?
Oh, yeah, I'd be happy to speak to that. Like I said before, we're proud to support U.S. government a variety of different applications. These include stopping forced labor goods from entering the country, They include helping target illicit fentanyl supply chains. We also work with the UK on their global supply chain intelligence platform, a unified way to understand the physical economy at scale and to allow different departments and ministries to collaborate. And we work with a variety of other public and private sector on very similar initiatives. And what these are all unified by is this deep underlying base on it, source of truth, a shared system of record, and then be able to operate and collaborate across these multiple tiers. I've talked to the public sector there. I'm actually happy to give some private sector examples too, but I think your audience may be less interested in that.
I think it is interesting to have that. A lot of the project success is indicated by getting some of the fundamentals right, making sure that we're operating from the same data set, that we're maybe the assumptions going into the model are agreed upon and clear and transparent, as you said. I guess any kind of key differentiators between what Altana provides for public sector organizations and how it's used in the private sector, or maybe beyond your company, any sort of differentiating factors between AI use cases within supply chain visibility in the private sector versus public?
I think in some sense, everyone involved in the supply chain and the physical economy is touching on some of the same issues, and then their role in that issue can, of course, switch. Like private companies want to avoid usage of forced labor for both moral and strongly felt ethical reasons, as well as legal reasons. The same thing goes for exposure to sanctions. The same thing goes for like moving the goods quickly across a border that are compliant and good to something that's shared by both the private sector and the public. The public force that the private sector is, they need to collaborate together. Source procurement, of course, supportive, whether it's government programs, whether it's just in general, just the private sector, not for government procurement, understanding and build up these resilient, safe, and secure value chains for critical and consumer applications. And then insurance, just to speak to what is insurance? Can we work on also economic security? So can you ensure supply of foodstuffs? Can you ensure supply of critical systems, right? And what is insurance? Insurance is understanding and then being able to sort of financialize at scale the risk of disruption when we're talking about supply chain insurance. That's the same type of analysis that you might do at a national scale to understand different scenarios and different potential disruptions that could occur. At a national scale, it's not always possible to ensure risk of that magnitude, but you do need to mitigate it. And so, again, you're talking about the same types of construct map and then analyze that map at scale and understand where are the bottlenecks, what are the potential scenarios that could occur, and allow action upon that. So again, very similar technology. And so we see a ton of overlap.
Yeah. And just to follow up on that, when developing and designing these scenarios, I would imagine there's significant care being put into those. Like what are the drivers that could disrupt or otherwise impact a supply chain or an insured, market? Running a lot of simulations to see likelihood of probability of occurring. I guess how collaborative have you been with some of the organizations that you work with in crafting these scenarios to be as realistic and, I guess, parameterized as possible? Is that kind of a big part of the tool? Is that something that you all do in-house? I guess, could you elaborate on that?
Oh, we've definitely been in collaboration. So we partner with Lloyd's of London and various other members of that group, major insurers. And we're so grateful for that partnership and collaboration. Like, you would not be doing this alone. You know what I mean? This is a deeply complicated field, both insurance and global value chains. We're very grateful to our partners and their deep expertise, and we love the collaboration. But it has to be that collaboration, you know what I mean? Where you're like, how do you combine this value chain management system, this underlying map with insurance markets, with all this deep analytics and expertise that are present in those organizations? It's a lot of work, but the prize is the opportunity to really actually, again, offer forms of insurance at maximums that just could not be done before. And I know that can sound dry, but what you're really talking about here is building resilient national and organizational economies.
And when you use the term resilient, does that mean necessarily being able to respond to multiple scenarios in parallel, being able to respond to the most edge case that you all have crafted in collaboration with other stakeholders involved in running some of these models? How do you characterize a highly resilient supply chain?
So I would break resiliency into both proactive and reactive components. So proactive would be going through and understanding just different network, both scenarios that could play out overall, as well as just straight up, regardless of scenarios, like where are the bottlenecks? So if your average country, you were no longer able to do business with them, or some other sub-geography, if it went away, what would your value chain look like? What would happen if your most important geography went away? And this is I think a fairly in an era of rising tensions, this is a important analysis, right? We look at Ukraine, Russia, Israel, potential problems out in East Asia. There's a lot of ways in which you can see very real disruptions taking place right now. And you could do the same thing at the supplier level. What happens if, like, on average, what happens to your most important, where are the bottlenecks, et cetera? Then reactively, what we aim, and this goes back to the C-Focus Act, or for your users, they're probably familiar with the OODA loop. We aim to really tighten that OODA loop and drive it forward. And so by fusing in real-time events information at scale across the multiple tiers, you're able to be like, oh my gosh, 2 tiers back, this natural disaster or this conflict event is impacting this supplier of this critical good. And I wasn't even aware. And I'm now aware, and much faster than what before. It would have been like months and months. And then 2 months later, someone's going to call you up and be like, actually, we got our rubber came from here and now our thing's late, right? And so we saw a lot of this in COVID. We saw this with the Red Sea. Understanding what's happening in advance allows a lot of opportunity to adapt much more quickly. And we're proud to partner with Data around that type of real-time information fusion with this multi-tier value chain. And it's enormously effective.
And one thing that I know a lot of organizations that Corner Alliance supports through product management, strategy, engaging stakeholders is the development of standards and almost commoditizing the ways in which a good in any given supply chain is labeled, named, and tracked. Have you noticed any sort of standards gaps in the way in which the market at large is characterizing these highly complex networks? And if so, is there any low-hanging fruit that would really make your and others' jobs easier in terms of making that system more, accessible and visible and transparent?
That's funny. I was just out at the World Trade Organization speaking on this subject with Walmart, Maersk, and the World Bank, actually. We were talking about in the context of environmental regulation, where it's like there's many new standards, many of them coming out of the EU, whether that's Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, CSRD, Deforestation Reg, I could go on. And what do these all imply? In some ways, they have a similarity to the UFLPA in that they're talking about the multi-tier understanding of value chains and their impact, whether that's on human rights or that's impact on the environment. And just for your users, so they're aware, the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act is the UFLPA, which is about understanding the connection to those terrible forms of forced labor in the multiple tiers. And so what all of these imply then is really this deep multi-tier understanding. And what I would say we really think would be really effective is the setting of common standards. So there's these product passport initiatives, the digital product passports, having standard digital product passports and way of understanding these things across countries will make it even easier to have them adopted and for all the participating parties to go through and produce these, provide the information, again, build up that collaborative vision of a better globalization that we're all looking for. So as the regulatory requirement increases, if it's at least a harmonized regulatory requirement, it's extraordinarily helpful.
That's a great point. And I know something that's come up in standards conversations around the electrical engineering, communications, and computing ecosystem in the past couple of years. Great. I think in terms of giving advice to government leaders, policymakers, or government executives who are looking to possibly integrate AI into trade, logistics, economic security, or other kind of public safety or public-facing functions, are there best practices or recommendations that you have to leverage AI scale capabilities while avoiding potential pitfalls?
The first one I would say, and it's not going to surprise you, is based on a source of truth. You can use AI to help you construct that source of truth. If the data isn't structured well, it's a golden moment for that, but have that source of truth. Look at not just generative AI, but hybrid systems and use the right tool for the job. I hope no one has heard from this podcast that Peter's out there telling you all that you got to be using large language models for everything. Do not believe that. There's many other types of systems that you can be using and applying. I would say just test and ensure these unbiased, reliable, and effective systems. We talked about some of those measures of testing earlier, but it's test them and use the quantitative measures, but also just the sort of the data science measures, but also test them against your business outcomes. Have those estimates of those outcomes. Human in the loop can often be appropriate. That's not feasible in all cases. Like in some cases, you'll want to surface that evidentiary information to the human, and you should always be able to do that. And then finally, I'd just say choose systems that respect data security, privacy, and sovereignty. And we've spent a lot of time working on those subjects ourselves, like federated systems that can be deployed out into secure cloud that can really do the compute and the information in a way that preserves security and then enables really high value use cases in the government, but also in the private sector. Like everybody, this is important to everybody. And so I would really emphasize those 5 items as I think about guidelines for good AI projects.
Yeah, and I do know that work at Department of Commerce, HHS, I think the preserving kind of data sovereignty and even using tools such as confidential computing or abstracting information, sharing summary statistics when collaborating across jurisdictions rather than the source information are all widely accepted methods to respect that and allow people to maintain IP, retain user data rights, and insulate yourself from risk. So I think in addition to that, or I guess building on the best practices, do you see any sort of general trends or other drivers impacting the ways in which government adopts and expands use of AI systems?
I would say certainly just the capabilities, the rapid increase that we're seeing right now. The O1 Strawberry model is extremely exciting. But just to make sure the users are aware of what I'm talking about, its new ability to carry out much more sophisticated reasoning present within an AI model, and moving from the level of having a smart intern to maybe having an average grad student who can assist in deeper scientific or deeper analytical research. And certainly we would put our work within that category. Just that increasing capability and thus the ability to achieve that, I would say, the organizational singularity, that's really going to be so powerful for governments. And those governments and nations that seize that opportunity will, in a correct way, will really benefit.
Well said. Peter, thanks so much for joining us here this afternoon. For the listeners, where can people go to check out more of your work and learn more about the research and capabilities that Altana has to offer?
Yeah, please go to altana.ai. We got a large variety of just blog posts and examples that touch upon much of the matters here. We're also on LinkedIn, Altana, and follow us there.
Great. Peter Swartz, co-founder and chief scientist at Altana. Thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to having you back here shortly. Thanks again.
Mark, such a pleasure. Have a great one.
You too.
AI, Government and the Future is brought to you by Corner Alliance. To find out more about Corner Alliance and how we work with government to create results, visit our website at corneralliance.com. And then make sure to search for AI Government Future in Apple Podcasts, Spotify and Google Podcasts, or anywhere else podcasts are found. And click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at Corner Alliance, thanks for listening.